Mr. President, I have more to say on this issue. Some of us will be on the floor for an hour, but I wanted to give the floor over to Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico, who has been certainly a leading advocate in the fight for policies that will reverse global warming and move us in another direction. Senator Udall.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Thank you very much. I first wanted to ask my colleague from Vermont a little bit about some of the things that he said that I find really remarkable now. We're in still a very fragile recession. The economy's starting to grow, but it's not strong enough, and we could slip back. And so what's happened here is we have these, what we call in this language, tax extenders. Well, what we're really talking about is jobs, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about the idea that we can have a clean energy economy, that over the last couple of years this has been the fastest growing sector, and we have a production tax credit for wind. We have a section in the Treasury Department 603. Those provisions create jobs. And I just wanted to ask the Senator, it seems to me at this particular time we have the potential to grow the American economy, but we've got to get off the dime because these things expire on February 29th in less than 2 weeks.
Well, I would say to my friend, he is absolutely right. The issue that we're talking about now is not only trying to reverse global warming and save the planet. What we're talking about is creating, over a period of years, millions of good-paying jobs. Now, you may not know it from some media reports, but the fact of the matter is the solar industry in this country is exploding. All over this country, we're seeing more and more installations of solar panels. We're seeing production of solar. And one of the issues that I think Senator Udall is referring to is whether or not the United States of America will be a leader in sustainable energy, or we're going to give that whole enormous economic area over to China. And I know the Senator and I are in agreement that we believe American workers can manufacture those panels. We think American workers can install those panels. We also understand that it's not just solar, it is wind, that these industries need some of the help that the fossil fuel industry has been receiving for years. And I think we'll also be talking about the whole issue of energy efficiency and weatherization, which in my state is enormously important. We are creating jobs, saving consumers money as we retrofit their homes and cut back on their use of fuel. So, yes, Senator, we are talking about a major jobs issue.
Senator Sanders, and the thing that we should focus on when it comes to wind farms is how much these wind farms today can be expanded in terms of jobs. The average wind farm in America built today has 50 large wind turbines. Each turbine can produce electricity to power roughly 500 homes, even accounting for the variability of the wind. So the average wind farm can power about 25,000 homes. The average wind farm then produces many other benefits, and this is what is remarkable to me. $20 million in construction payroll in a year from an average wind farm. $875,000 per year to rural local school districts. Also, $280,000 per year to rural county governments. $150,000 per year in ongoing direct payroll for employees. $1.5 million in contract labor payroll, and $300,000 to $600,000 per year in royalties to landowners, farmers, and ranchers. So when we talk about wind, what we're really talking, wind power, what we're talking about is American jobs, clean energy jobs, growing the economy, and it mystifies me that our friends on the Republican side and in the House are saying, well, these things are going to expire in 2 weeks, and there's no hurry to push them to put them in place and to move it. Is that your understanding? Is that
Absolutely.
they're saying
Now,
we're going to let this expire?
It is incomprehensible. Here you have technologies that are incredibly successful. They are producing substantial amounts of energy without pollution, without greenhouse gases. They are creating jobs. And of course, we should continue these tax credits, these extenders, to make sure that these industries can flourish. You know, some people may think that when Senator Udall and I talk about wind and solar, you're talking about some kind of fringe idea. Let's be clear. In the state of Texas today, they are producing 10,000 megawatts of electricity through wind. That is the equivalent of 10 average-sized nuclear power plants. That is not significant. In Iowa, as I understand it, about 20% of the electricity in that state is generated from wind. So we are in the beginning, in the first stages of a real revolution to transform our energy system to clean, safe energy, which in the process can create over a period of years millions of good-paying jobs. So I would certainly agree with the senator from New Mexico.
Senator Sanders, so one of the things that I think is very instructive here is that the history of the wind production tax credit has been completely bipartisan. And I'd like to just lay out a little bit of that history. The production tax credit began in a bipartisan energy policy in 1992, signed by then-President George H.W. Bush. It was extended in December 1999 by a Republican Congress and signed into law by President Clinton. It was extended again in 2002 and in 2004, this time signed into law by President George W. Bush. And in 2005, it was extended again as a part of bipartisan energy legislation, the 2005 Energy Policy Act. And you and I think, were both in the House at that time, and we voted for that in the House. In December 2006, it was extended again, and most recently it was extended in the 2009 Recovery Act, which was signed by President Obama. So Congress should continue this bipartisan tradition and extend the wind production tax credit, these other tax credits that create clean energy jobs, and stay focused on the good job that we've been doing on this that's been bipartisan. And that's why I don't understand the House, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee saying, oh, we can do these later. We need to do this work today. We need to put that in place now so that we can grow these clean energy jobs. Is that your understanding?
Well, the senator is absolutely right. I think what everybody understands, if you're in business, if you're in wind or in solar, you have to be planning for the future. And if you do not believe or you're uncertain about whether these tax credits are going to be available, what is going to happen is you're not going to go forward. And we know that there are examples right now of major projects which have already been canceled. And furthermore, we are not talking, given the context of U.S. government expenditures, a huge amount of money here. But it is money that I think is very well spent, protects our environment, and creates jobs. I see the senator from Rhode Island has joined us, and Senator Whitehouse has surely been one of the strongest advocates for our environment and the need to address global warming. We're delighted that he's with us. Senator Whitehouse.
Well, thank you, Senator Sanders, and thank you, Senator Udall. I'm glad to have the chance to join with you today, and I appreciate very much, Senator Sanders, you convening us on this day when we've agreed, it appears, to extend the payroll tax. We've agreed, it appears, to extend unemployment insurance. We've agreed, it appears, to extend the payments for doctors under Medicare, under the so-called doc fix. And the one piece that has fallen out was the tax extenders that support our clean energy industry. Our clean energy industry has more employees than big oil, and they're well-paying jobs, and it's a growing industry, and it creates American manufacturing and American installation. Senator Udall was talking about the economic value of these wind farms. I know that in his home state, they're plenty of wind farms that are built on the land. In my home state, we're working towards having wind farms that are built offshore. And the ability to construct those giant turbines at Quonset Point in Rhode Island in order to install them offshore and enjoy the power and the jobs that result is something that's really important to us. And so I'm glad you've called us together to focus on this question of the tax extenders and also to focus on the environmental harm of climate change. And I'll turn it back to you, but I want to make one last point before I do, which is that there's a certain amount of sort of snickering around Washington about climate change, which is a unique feature to Washington. If you go out into the scientific community, nobody's laughing. They're very anxious. They are worried. The major scientific organizations have all signed off on public letters urging us to do something about this because it is so significant. We've looked out at the first dozen billion-dollar storms year that we've had. Wherever you look around this world, we are seeing extreme weather. And the notion that when the scientists predicted extreme weather and now we're seeing it, that shouldn't be cause for additional concern, it really flies in the face of both prudence and reality. And the last area where we're really getting clobbered is with our oceans. As we pump in human time unprecedented amounts of carbon into our atmosphere, it's taken up by the oceans. It is absorbed by the oceans. During the course of the Industrial Revolution and to now, oceans have absorbed enormous amounts of carbon, and it's changing the oceans. It's killing off the coral reefs in the tropic areas. It is making the ocean so acidic that the little organisms that are at the base of the food chain are having trouble growing to their proper size. It's becoming a hostile environment. Creatures do not live well in an environment in which they are increasingly soluble. And these are not theories. This is measurement by scientists who go out and actually measure what is happening. And the blindness in Washington to this problem is something that is not only a cause for concern now, but is going to, I think, be a cause for harsh judgments in history's eye.
Mr. Whitehouse, could I just ask you, and I know that you may have other places to go, but you mentioned offshore wind on the Atlantic coast.
Yeah.
And to me, the study out of the University of Delaware, which indicated that off of the Atlantic coast, there's the potential in wind to generate enough electricity with wind to power the entire East Coast group of cities, very large cities, as you know, from Providence to New York to Boston. And Google is already out there starting to lay the grid with some other partners. And so we have huge potential to move forward. And basically what we're being told at this point is, oh, let these things expire. And Senator Sanders, as we know, very, very short-sighted position. But that study about off your coast there is an eye-opener because it tells the American people, look, here's clean energy. We don't have to import oil anymore. We don't have to bring in energy from outside. Just off our coast, we can go out there and put a grid in place and generate wind energy. And I know you've probably heard about this study.
Well, if I can, let me just jump in to ask unanimous consent that Senators Whitehouse, Udall, and I be permitted to engage in a colloquy.
Yeah.
Which is what we...
Without objection, as we have been doing.
If I could ask Senator Whitehouse and Senator Udall a simple question, which Senator Whitehouse raised this issue. All over the world, there really is no debate within the scientific community about the reality of global warming, the basic causes of global warming, the severity of global warming. And yet suddenly, here in this Congress, it becomes a major political issue. You know, we fund the National Institute of Health. We fund scientific organizations. They do research on cancer. They do research on heart disease. They do all kinds of research. I don't see great political debates about what this science, and suddenly where you have almost unanimity within the scientific community, suddenly this becomes this great dividing political issue. How did it happen that where there is so much unanimity among the scientific community in this country and around the world, that this has become such a hot potato political issue?
Special interests would be my answer, Senator Sanders. We've seen it before. We saw the science mocked that tobacco was injurious to human health. We saw the science mocked that the lead in lead paint was injurious to children. And now we have seen mockery of the science that shows that when you put unprecedented amounts of carbon up into the atmosphere, it changes things. The science on this is actually not new. The scientist who created the global warming theory was a scientist named Tyndall, who published his work around the time of the American Civil War. And it's never been controversial, the idea that when you put enormous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, it creates a warming effect, a blanketing effect. We've known this literally since the horse and buggy era. The difference is there are now powerful special interests that are involved here. And to Senator Udall's point, we're at a point of choice. We can choose to go towards having the environmental needs of the country met and the energy needs of the country met with clean, American-made, manufactured power that is clean, that is renewable. The senator is right about the capabilities of offshore wind on the East Coast. But that's not the only road we could take. We could continue to support multinational mega corporations who have no loyalty to any flag or nation and who traffic internationally in oil and who want to make sure that we stay, as President Bush said, addicted to oil. There's a choice, and I think those special interests have a clear desire as to what choice this country should make. I happen to believe it's contrary to this country's national interests, and so that's why we're here, fighting to try to steer the other direction.
Senator Sanders, just to the point of, why we aren't able to move, and I agree with Senator Whitehouse, and I think you've seen this also. There are, when you get into energy, there are huge, powerful special interests, and especially those special interests that are representing fossil fuel. And what they would love better than anything is to just have the status quo. And what we have seen is they're relying, and this is amazing to me, and you've been one of the leaders on this issue, where big oil is getting subsidies today from the federal government, and we've tried to take those big oil subsidies and move them over into the clean energy area. They even resist that, even though President Bush and the leaders of their industry say, we don't need these subsidies.
Well, if I could, I would just point out, picking up on Senator Udall's point, in recent years, we have seen, as everybody in America knows, not only are we paying outrageously high prices at the pump, but we're seeing oil companies, making huge profits. My recollection is that in the last 10 years, the oil companies have made about $1 trillion in profits. ExxonMobil has made more money than any corporation in history. And yet, over the last 10 years, there have been examples, there have been cases in a given year where a major oil company, ExxonMobil being one, made huge profits, billions in profits, and ended up paying zero in taxes, federal income taxes, and in fact got a rebate. So you have this absurd situation where usually profitable oil companies paying nothing in taxes, and some of us think that doesn't make any sense at all. We think that they should pay their fair share, and that to a significant degree that money should go into sustainable energy so that we can break our addiction to oil. Senator Whitehouse?
And the results are really profound. I'll close with this point in this discussion. For as long, essentially, as mankind has been on this earth, for 800,000 years, to put 800,000 years in scale, we've probably been engaged in agriculture as a species for 10 or 15,000 years. Before that, we were pure hunter-gatherers. So 800,000 years, 8,000 centuries, is an enormous period of time in human history. It is essentially the entire sweep of the human species on the face of the earth. And throughout that period, we have existed within an atmosphere that stayed within a range of carbon concentration. For the first time in 8,000 centuries, we have now rocketed outside of that range. That ought to be a pretty significant warning to us that we are in new and untested territory in terms of the basic conditions of the environment that supports our species. And because the concentrations in the atmosphere have grown so greatly, so has the acidity of our ocean. And if you go back into geologic time to look at what changes like this potentially lead to, you see really massive adverse events like catastrophic die-offs of species. So we're playing with very, very potentially big consequences. We're playing outside of the boundaries that have governed our planet for 800,000 years, and we are refusing to correct what is going on, I believe, as you have both pointed out, because of one predominant reason, and that is the power of special interests to phony up a debate in this town.
Senator Sanders, I'm going to close because I need to preside, but I would just ask unanimous consent to put my statement in the record and also the facts about an average wind farm and one sheet on the history of the wind production tax credit. And then I would like to thank
Without objection.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank you for asking us to come to the floor, for leading this debate. This is a debate that we need to carry on until we get these production tax credits, other tax extenders in place to move our clean energy industry forward. And I thank you for that, and I yield the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for all the good work that you are doing. Mr. President, what I would like to do is just pick up on a point that Senator Whitehouse just raised, and that is the record of history shows us that we cannot take the climate for granted. Our relatively limited experience of advancement over the last 10,000 years, during a time of stable climate on a planet that is billions of years old, has distorted our view of the Earth's complex climate system. A recent National Academies of Science report stated, and I quote, "It seems clear that the Earth's future will be unlike the climate that ecosystems and human societies have been accustomed to during the last 10,000 years. And that's the point Senator Whitehouse just made. And that's according to the National Academies of Science. The reason is that human activities, primarily the burning of fossil fuels, are increasing greenhouse gas emissions and causing global warming. According to the U.S. Global Change Research Program, quote, global warming is unequivocal and primarily human-induced, end of quote. We have altered the climate that has sustained humanity for the last 10,000 years. We are now at 392 parts per million of carbon dioxide, up from 280 parts per million in the 18th century. What an extraordinary increase in carbon dioxide in that short period of time. And greenhouse gas levels are rising steadily. In fact, carbon dioxide levels are increasing faster than at any time on record, according to our EPA. Mr. President, maybe that 392 parts per million seems like an abstract number. So let me put it into context. According to UCLA researchers, the last time carbon dioxide levels were consistently this high, last time, was 15 million years ago. 15 million years ago. The Earth at that time was 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it is today. At that level of warmth, there is no permanent sea ice in the Arctic and little, if any, ice on Antarctica and Greenland. That explains in part why sea levels at that time were 75 to 120 feet higher than today. If sea levels today even approached half that level, we would inundate major coastal cities around the world and create hundreds of millions of displaced refugees. That is what we are talking about. So let me repeat. The last time carbon dioxide levels were consistently this high was 15 million years ago, at which time the Earth was 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it is today. Now, there is no doubt that if we do nothing to reverse global warming, we are doing more than just threatening harm to the environment. We are jeopardizing the future of our planet and much of humanity. All too often, we talk about global warming as if the impacts will be somewhere down the line, maybe in 100 years, maybe in 200 years. And maybe isn't it too bad that those polar bears are trying to get by on that little block of ice? The reality is that global warming is impacting our planet today, and the impact is devastating. Mr. President, I see the senator from Minnesota who is here, who has been very, very active on this issue, and I know that he has some important points to be made, so I would yield the floor to Senator Franken of Minnesota.
I'd like to thank the senator from Vermont, and I'd like to thank also the presiding officer and the senator from Rhode Island for engaging in this colloquy that is so important. Mr. President, I rise today to urge my colleagues in the Senate to support an extension of the renewable energy production tax credit. This tax credit, currently slated to expire at the end of this year, has created thousands of jobs for the wind industry, has reduced our dependence on foreign oil, and is hugely important to Minnesota and to the nation. But because it takes a lot of time to order and manufacture new turbines, new wind turbines, investors need to know that the credit will exist in 2013 or else they won't invest. And that's why the credit must be extended now, along with the payroll tax extension and unemployment benefits. If Congress lets the renewable energy production tax credit expire, we will let down the 80,000 people working on wind farms and manufacturing facilities across the nation, and we may cost this country $10 billion in lost investment. Already, because of uncertainty about the fate of the production tax credit, investment in the wind industry is drying up. America cannot afford to wait any longer. Congress must act now to extend this important measure for American business and manufacturing, and indeed for the future of our planet. Just a few weeks ago, I received a letter from Terry and Janet Carlson, who run a family farm in Parker's Prairie, Minnesota, and are developing a wind project in their community. They write, I quote, "Our family believes in renewable energy and the benefits it can provide to our local community. Besides being environmentally friendly, wind energy has proved to be a great economic benefit to the state of Minnesota and small communities such as ours. But the 2012 expiration of the production tax credit has created a high level of uncertainty in the wind industry. We have a significant amount of time and money invested in this project, and the production tax credit expiration has a significant impact on our project moving forward. It also has a significant impact on the thousands of renewable energy-related jobs in America and the economic boon that it would provide to our community." Terry and Janet have good reasons to be concerned. A Navigant consulting study found that if the production tax credit is not extended, construction of wind turbines will drop by 75% in 2013. That means a lot fewer manufacturing jobs and construction jobs. In fact, if Congress fails to extend the production tax credit, the wind industry will lose half of its jobs, dropping from 80,000 in 2012 to 41,000 in 2013. 39,000 well-paying construction and manufacturing jobs will evaporate if Congress fails to extend this tax credit. And what a shame that would be. Because we have had this discussion, we've had a colloquy before on global warming. And as the Senator from Vermont said in his opening remarks on this, the world community knows this exists. The world scientific community knows where this is going. And so China is doing wind. Germany is doing wind. Denmark is doing wind. This is the future of our energy. And if we stop producing wind energy, we're going to cede this to the rest of the world. So if we don't act now and renew the production tax credit, we're going to lose 40,000 jobs right now, but we're also going to lose the future. On the other hand, this tax policy has major potential for the American economy now and in the future with a 4-year extension. The production tax credit will continue to support growth in the wind industry, boosting construction of wind farms by 25%. Instead of losing 39,000 jobs, an extension of the wind production credit will create 15,000 additional well-paying construction and manufacturing jobs. With the help of the Renewable Energy Production Tax Credit, the wind industry has been a bright spot in these tough economic times. There are over 400 facilities across 43 states manufacturing for the wind energy industry. 16 of these facilities are in Minnesota and support about 3,000 jobs. Currently, a majority of wind industry parts are produced here in America, and I think that is so important when we talk about the future of our economy, which, after all, is something we talk about all the time here, or at least should be talking about all the time here, the future of our economy. Think about that. A majority, over half of wind energy parts are produced now here in America, whereas in 2005, just a quarter of components were made in this country. That's what we have to continue to do. That's the story we want to hear. Instead of exporting manufacturing jobs to other countries, the wind industry has been bringing well-paying, high-tech jobs back to America, where the technology was first invented. And that's thanks to the Renewable Energy Tax Credit. If we don't extend this tax credit, we'll fail these facilities and the people whose jobs are at stake. As uncertainty about the tax credit deepens, we've already seen that orders to wind manufacturing facilities are slowing down and companies are making layoffs. This is our fault here in Congress, and it is unacceptable. The longer we wait, the worse the layoffs and shutdowns will become. In fact, if we don't extend the tax credit this month, it will be too late for the wind industry to build any turbines in 2013. Wind turbines are big, and wind farms need to plan and order parts a year in advance. If wind farms can't depend on the tax credit for 2013, they can't make plans to build for the next year, which means they can't make orders to 400 manufacturing facilities across the country for parts. Because of the uncertainty of the tax credit in 2013, production now in 2012 has already come to a halt. That's why we need to extend this tax credit now. immediately in the payroll tax package. For the past several months, we've been celebrating reports that the unemployment rate is improving. This is fantastic news, but we can't rest on our laurels yet, and we must be sure to enact smart policies that promote businesses and job growth in the parts of the economy that need it most and which are the future. The renewable energy tax credit does just that. It will promote growth in manufacturing and construction, industries that deserve our help the most. America has tremendous wind resources, most of which is still untapped. Take Minnesota, for example. We're ranked 5th in the country for the most installed wind capacity, and yet our wind resources could still provide 25 times more energy. This is a huge opportunity for this country, an opportunity that we can't afford to dismiss. Wind blows all over this nation. It blows in red states and in blue states alike. It is an abundant, cheap, clean energy resource that is proving to be a boon to our economy. We cannot stop developing it now. I urge my colleagues to extend the renewable energy production tax credit immediately, at the same time that we extend the payroll tax cut and unemployment benefits. I want to thank the presiding officer for his leadership on this. I want to thank the senator from Vermont. I want to thank the senator from Rhode Island and so many others who are leading this fight. You know, this is just smart on an economic basis. But we are facing a crisis that scientists around the world agree on.
Well, let me, if I might, thank the senator.
I will yield to the senator for Vermont. I've said what I wanted to say about the wind production tax credit and the other renewable energy tax credits, and I thank the senator of Vermont for his leadership.
I thank the senator
from Vermont.
From Minnesota. The point that he makes is indisputable, and that is, if we are serious about creating decent-paying, meaningful jobs in this country, why in God's name are we not extending 1603 for solar and wind and the renewable energy tax credit? This will enable us to create good-paying jobs, make sure that sustainable energy is an important part of our economy, and allow this country to play a leadership role in reversing greenhouse gas emissions and combating global warming. Mr. President, I think there are some people who say, well, maybe global warming might be real, but we don't have to worry about it today. Its impacts will not be seen for decades or centuries to come. And I would suggest that that just is not quite correct. We are seeing the impact of global warming, climate change right now. Let me just give you an example. According to studies in my own state of Vermont, in northern New England, if we fail to reverse global warming, we will see continued temperature increases, and Vermont's climate by 2080 is projected to be similar to Georgia's climate today. 2080 in the great scheme of things is not all that far away. And to think that Vermont, northern New England, will have a climate similar to where Georgia is today is really rather extraordinary if that takes place by the year 2080. Clearly, if that trend takes place, it would be devastating in many respects for Vermont, including our winter tourism and our sugar maple producers, among other aspects of our economy. Mr. President, Lake Champlain, our beautiful lake, which borders New York State and Vermont, which used to freeze For 9 out of every 10 years in the early 20th century froze over just 3 times in the 1990s and has not fully frozen over since 2007. So in my small state, state of Vermont, northern New England, we are seeing the impact of climate change today, and the idea that by the year 2080, Vermont's climate will be similar to what the state of Georgia is today is just unthinkable and extraordinary, and just tells you the impact that global warming is having. Mr. President, according to NASA, 2010 tied 2005 for the warmest year since records began in 1880. 9 of the 10 warmest years on record have occurred since the year 2000. The last decade was the warmest on record. Mr. President, we have seen temperature records being recorded all over the planet in the year 2010. During that year, Pakistan set a record for recording the highest temperature ever in Asia, hitting 129 degrees Fahrenheit. Iraq set its own record for high temperature at over 125 degrees. Sudan reached a record 121 degrees. Los Angeles, right here in California, in our country, had a record 113-degree day, and Houston, Texas, set a record for its highest monthly average temperature. In the United States, according to a New York Times article, 2 record high temperatures are now set for every 1 record low. National Climatic Data Center shows that 26,500 record high temperatures were recorded at weather stations across the United States in the summer of 2011. Texas set the record for the warmest summer of any state since instrument records began. Oklahoma set a record for its warmest summer, exceeding the record set during the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s. But we're not just looking at hot temperature and hot days. What are the impact of those kinds of weather changes? What does it mean to people's lives? Mr. President, scientists used to say that they could not tie a particular event to climate change. That is no longer true. Our understanding of climate and extreme weather has advanced. Now, NASA's James Hansen and his colleagues can say that some of the extreme heat waves that we have seen, such as those in Russia and Texas and Oklahoma over the past several years, were caused by global warming because their likelihood would be negligible if not for global warming. And let me just give you some other examples of what global warming is doing in terms of heat waves and its impact, its horrendous impact on the lives of people. In Europe, some of us remember Europe in 2003. During that period, Europe 2003, a heat wave caused temperatures to reach or exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the United Kingdom and France, and led to high temperatures throughout Europe for weeks, which killed 70,000 people, according to the World Health Organization. Many older people, people with respiratory problems, people who were fragile in health died during that period. Heat wave, Europe 2003, 70,000 people died. In Russia, in 2010, a weeks-long heat wave sent temperatures soaring above 100 degrees Fahrenheit in areas where the average temperature that time of year is 67 degrees. 56,000 people died during that period as a result of that heat wave, and wildfires created a smoke plume nearly 2,000 miles wide, which was visible from space. So this is not some kind of abstract issue. Oh my goodness, isn't it too bad it's really hot today? What you're talking about are prolonged heat waves that kill substantial numbers of people. India, 2010, they recorded temperatures of over 100 degrees that killed hundreds of people. Chile, 2011, a heat wave, drought, and wildfire in Chile has destroyed 57,000 acres of forest and land, forced 500 people to evacuate. Australia, 2012. The start of 2012 was the hottest start of any year for Australia in a century, according to ABC News, with temperatures exceeding 104 degrees and electricity cut off to some areas to prevent the igniting of fires. Mr. President, prolonged and more severe drought is likely to increase as global warming continues, according to the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado. This means increased risk of crop failure, wildfires, and water scarcity. A recent study published in Scientific American found that climate change has cut production of cereal crops, wheat, rice, corn, soybeans, causing these crops to be nearly 19% more expensive than if global warming was not occurring. So, Mr. President, I could go on and on about this issue, but the main point that I want to make is the following, and let me summarize it here. According to virtually the entire scientific community in the United States of America and around the world, according to virtually every agency of the United States government, global warming is real and it is significantly caused by human activity. And people are mistaken if they believe that the impact of global warming will just be in decades to come. We are seeing very negative impacts today, and what the scientific community tells us, if we do not begin to reverse greenhouse gas emissions, those problems in America and around the world will only get worse. Now, if there is a silver lining in all of that, is that, Mr. President, right now, we know how to cut greenhouse gas emissions. We know how to move to energy efficiency, mass transportation, automobiles that get 50, 60, 100 miles per gallon. We know how to weatherize our homes so that we can cut significantly the use of fuel. And what we also know is that in the middle of this recession, if we move in that direction, energy efficiency and sustainable energy, we can create over a period of years millions of good-paying jobs. So let me conclude by saying this. We now have the opportunity to be in a win-win-win situation. We can save consumers money. We can significantly reduce greenhouse gases and protect our planet. And we can create substantial numbers of jobs that we desperately need in the midst of this terrible recession. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
General speeches in the Senate right now. A short time ago, the Senate voted to approve the nomination of Alaberto Jose Jordan of Florida to be the U.S. Circuit Judge for the 11th Circuit. Through the rest of the day, we are expecting work on surface transportation programs and policy. President Obama is on the road today and for the next 3 days. Today he'll be in Milwaukee at the Master Lock Company for a tour and to talk about the economy. A little bit later this afternoon, the President will travel to Los Angeles for a fundraiser. In all, the President will host 8 fundraisers during his West Coast swing. And by the way, C-SPAN 3 will have the President's remarks in Milwaukee this afternoon, starting at 1:40 Eastern. And we continue to bring you budget hearings all this week on the C-SPAN networks with the release this week of the President's $3.8 trillion budget proposal. A short time ago, White House OMB Acting Director Jeffrey Zients testified before the House Budget Committee on the President's spending plan. You can see that in the C-SPAN video library. A little bit later this afternoon, Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano will testify on her agency's budget, which calls for a slight overall decrease from last year and an increase in spending for cybersecurity. You can see that live beginning at 2:30 Eastern.
Senator
on
from Iowa.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in the fall of 2010, I came to this chamber to speak about my growing concern of synthetic drug use in this country. Specifically, I raised concerns about a popular new drug known as K2 or spice, and I learned about this myself for the first time because a constituent of mine by the name of David Rosica committed suicide. David killed himself shortly after smoking a package of the drug he and some friends bought simply at a local shopping mall. At the time, David's death in June 2010 was one of the first deaths associated with what was a new and very dangerous drug craze. Now, nearly 2 years after David's death, the use of synthetic drugs like K2 has exploded and is becoming a major problem across the country. In 2009, the American Association of Poison Centers reported only 13 calls concerning synthetic drug use. 1 year later, in 2010, over 1,300 calls were made to poison centers about synthetic drugs. Now, last year, so I've gone to 2009, 2010, and now 2011. We've gone from 13 to 1,300 to last year, 12,000 calls to poison centers regarding synthetic drugs. The Monitoring the Future survey, a survey of high school youth, asked students about for the first time last year, if they ever tried synthetic drugs. Roughly 1 in 9 high school seniors responded that they had used synthetic drugs last year. These numbers are quite obviously an astonishing increase in just 2 years. And it illustrates, of course, how rapidly the use of these drugs have come on the scene. These drugs are having a terrible effect on those who use them. Emergency room doctors across the country are reporting increasing uses of synthetic drugs and the number of users coming to the hospital. My staff heard from one such doctor from upstate New York about what she has seen. Dr. Sandra Snyder, Rochester, New York, reported that users in her ER experienced psychotic episodes, rapid heart rate, very high blood pressure, and seizures. In some cases, users, many of whom were in their teens and 20s, suffered heart attacks and strokes and died as a result. Other cases involved users who tried to kill themselves, harm others, got into a car accident while high on these synthetic drugs. Now, how do we get from practically no use to where we are now? The people who manufacture and sell these drugs have circumvented the laws to easily sell synthetic drugs online, at gas stations, in novelty stores, at the local shopping malls, and in tobacco stores and other shops. Many of the drugs are manufactured overseas in countries like China and then imported into the United States. They spray chemical compounds that have not been tested on humans and were not intended for human consumption on dried leaves. They package and market these drugs to appear as legitimate products like incense, bath salts, plant food, and snow remover. They slap a label on these packages stating that the product is not for human consumption to get around FDA regulations. Over 30 states have passed laws to ban various synthetic drug compounds. The Drug Enforcement Administration has also acted to stop these drugs. Although the DEA has used its emergency scheduling powers to control 7 chemical compounds, there are too many on the market now for DEA to go through the long and laborious process to schedule each and every one. The makers of these drugs know this as well and have altered their chemical formulas, some as little as a molecule, to get around existing state and federal laws. This is exactly the case in my home state of Iowa. Iowa passed a law last year that banned many chemical compounds. However, the law only listed a specific set of chemical compounds, and the drug makers are now altering their formulas. Recently, 2 Iowa youths have become victims of the new drugs. One is a Polk County teenager who got into high-speed crash after smoking a product called, quote-unquote, 100% pure evil. This teen had 2 other passengers in her car. After smoking this product, the driver became agitated and stated she wanted to kill herself. She started driving her car into several trees. When paramedics arrived at the scene, they reported that everyone was badly hurt and the driver was vomiting blood. Thankfully, all passengers survived the crash. Another teen in central Iowa experienced a near-death experience after smoking the same product. This teen purchased the product, and remember the name, 100% pure evil. They purchased it at a local store and started convulsing and vomiting shortly after smoking the drug. Once a paramedic got this boy to the hospital, he fell into a coma. He, however, woke from the coma the next day, but had failed to recognize his mother or grandmother at the hospital. Thankfully, this boy has since recovered his memory. Now he suffers occasional anxiety attacks. When the boy's mother told the police about the product and where he got it from, she reported that the police told her there was nothing they could do about it because it was not known what was in the product and it may be legal. This product is still being reviewed to see if any compounds fall under Iowa's law. Nearly a year ago, I introduced this legislation that we named after the person that died 2 years ago, David Rosga. And I introduced this bill with Senator Feinstein that bans the chemicals that comprise K2 spice. We designed the legislation to capture a wide variety of compounds so it would not be so easy to circumvent this law by altering the molecule. In fact, the Iowa Governor's Office of Drug Control Policy is crafting new legislation based on the legislation I introduced last year that captures more substances. My legislation was unanimously passed out of the Judiciary Committee 8 months ago. It is currently being prevented from consideration by the full Senate by just 1 senator. The House of Representatives passed its version of the Synthetic Drug Control Act overwhelmingly last December, with over 70% of the representatives supporting scheduling these drugs. Many of the opponents of this legislation stated on the House floor that by scheduling these compounds, we're preventing scientific research. This is far from true. Any scheduled substance, even current Schedule I drugs like cocaine and heroin, can be researched. Any scientist can apply to be registered by the DEA to research any drug. Just because we're removing the drugs from the store shelves does not mean that we cannot study them. So I say to my colleagues, it is now time for the Senate to take action. We cannot let the will of just one senator obstruct the will of many. I believe if our legislation received a vote and a fair debate in this body, that it would pass overwhelmingly. So I urge my colleagues to support our efforts to get these drugs off the store shelf and off the streets. And I urge the Senate leadership to allow a debate and a vote on the issue. The American people, people like the Rosga family and others who have been victims of these drugs, want to see this poison removed from their communities. And I appreciate the working together with the senator from Minnesota and the senator from New York on this bill.